The BBC has bitten the bullet. Up to 3.7 million pensioners aged over 75 are to lose their free TV licences from next year. They will have to pay the £154.50 annual fee themselves. Those eligible for the means-tested benefit of pension credit, however, will continue to receive them. So how, we might ask, did the BBC end up giving out free licence fees to the over 75s in the first place? The answer is that Labour introduced it at the turn of the millennium as part of its efforts to reduce pensioner poverty. But then came the financial crisis and austerity. In 2015, the previous Chancellor, George Osborne, was looking for spending cuts, and his eye fell on the cost to the public purse of those free licences. As part of its Royal Charter renewal process, the BBC agreed to take on the full cost of providing the free licences. The cost in 2021-22, as the government's contribution falls away, is projected to hit £745 million, almost a fifth of the BBC's budget, with the bill rising fast due to the ageing profile of the UK population. That's equal to the total amount the corporation spends on BBC Two, BBC Three, BBC Four, the BBC News Channel, CBBC and CBeebies combined. And the cost is set to top £1 billion by the end of the next decade. The BBC launched a consultation on free licences last year. As part of this, it commissioned some research which emphasised that while almost half of elderly households were in relative poverty in the year 2000, this has now fallen to a third. So as a means of helping the least well off, this has arguably become a blunter instrument. With today's decision to restrict the benefit to less well-off pensioners, the BBC hopes to effectively defray the current cost of this commitment from £745 million to £250 million. That should certainly ease the pressure on the rest of the corporation's budget for making news and entertainment. But there are potential problems. Not everyone who is on pension credit claims it. The BBC itself estimates that 900,000 households receive the benefit and that a further 600,000 are eligible but do not apply. If they do not claim the benefit, they will miss out on their free licence. And a key question remains above it all. Who will those who lose out blame? The government or the BBC?
Well, joining us now, the BBC chairman, David Clementi. Thanks for coming in. 3 million older people, we understand, will lose their TV licence with this move, their free TV licence with this move. There is a chance they simply might not come back to the BBC. Are you prepared to see them go?
Well, I'd be very disappointed. You must understand how difficult a decision this has been for the BBC. And I do recognise that for many pensioners today, what we've announced will be unwelcome. But we have a responsibility to all our viewers. We've balanced the interests of those over 75 against the interests of those of all ages who watch the BBC. We think that what we've proposed is fair to those over 75 and fair also to all our audiences who didn't want to see the level of cuts that would have been necessary if we'd extended the concession to all.
Let me ask you honestly, was there ever a moment when you thought the BBC might absorb this cost, or was it always a terrible idea?
I think that it was part of the 2015 settlement. In the 2015 settlement, the BBC did win many things that it wanted: a new 11-year charter. It was released from a significant obligation to roll out rural broadband. It was given, importantly, the government committed to increase the licence fee in line with inflation. Now, of course, we would have preferred that the policy on over 75s remained with the government and didn't move to the BBC. But Treasury ministers at the time, a period of austerity, made plain that they wanted the BBC to play its part in public service cuts.
But by introducing this link, though, to pension credit, you must surely recognise that the BBC is now making policy decisions based on welfare, that you have broken the sanctity of universality of the licence fee structure.
Only to the very limited extent permitted by the Digital Economy Act, which enshrined the agreement of 2015. The government passed us this responsibility. We had to consult carefully, and we've announced today the decision we've reached. We think it is fair to both those...
But we're on the slope now, aren't we? I mean, you know, we make programmes, not welfare policy. And if tomorrow the government says the BBC must fund, I don't know, TV licences for those on disabilities or lone parents. What's your response to them then?
My response is that it would need to be covered by legislation. Our obligations are clearly laid out in the Digital Economy Act, and they are very limited. They are in respect of people of pensionable age to determine what the position should be on free licences.
This time?
They were paid for by the government. The government has passed it to the BBC, and we need to make a responsible decision.
But we are now, if you like, an arm of the welfare state. We are now involved in the decision-making process of who deserves and who doesn't.
I accept that only to a very limited extent. We have tied our system to a pension credit. It's a well-known benefit introduced in 2003. The decision about at what level the threshold at which pension poverty should be alleviated rests clearly with government,
of course,
not with us.
But
so we're only involved to a very limited extent.
So I'm just wondering whether you think it was a mistake of George Osborne to voice that on the BBC, whether you, like Tom Watson today, would call on the next Prime Minister, whoever that is, to take this all back into government.
Well, our obligations are clearly set out in the Act, and we've followed it to the letter. You have to go back to the 2015 decision. The Conservatives have won the election. The government policy was austerity, and Treasury ministers made clear that they expected the BBC, as part of the public service, to play its role in public service cuts.
That Act also allows you to keep the BBC out of welfare policy and not pay for those licences. I mean,
well, we've consulted widely, and we've consulted from all the options, from those who argued that we should copy the concession, i.e. pay for everybody, to those who thought we should return to complete universality, no concession at all. That was the least supported of all the options. Reform options were heavily supported, and among those, the decision that we should link it to pension credit made a lot of sense. There is the issue raised in your film that the level of take-up of pension credit is not as high as it might be. But that's not a reason not to tie it to pension credit. It's a reason why we should work with some of the groups who represent elderly people to raise it.
David Clementi, thank you. Thank you very much.